I've got a question for you, dear viewers. If you just so happen to be a member of the LGBT community, do you remember who or what it was that made you realize you weren't straight? Maybe you suddenly found yourself crushing on an old friend, or you sat next to someone in class for the first time that just caught your attention in a new way. Or maybe you were taking a walk on a hot summer day and a shirtless guy walked by you and you suddenly felt awkwardly confined in your own shorts. Whatever the origin, do you remember the first person that made you go, oh shit, I might be gay? Well, if you do, congratulations, you have at least a passing familiarity with the idea behind the trope we're talking about today. The Closet Key is the trope name for a character whose role in the story, at least initially, is to establish the non-straight sexuality of an already established character, and it's almost exclusively used to reveal the sexuality of a character a long while after they've been an established part of the story they're in, both to themselves and the viewer. If a character has been established as non-straight from the start, or is at least aware of their sexuality from the get-go, then you don't really need a closet key for them since they're kind of already outside of it. But sometimes these characters can act as closet keys themselves, or the story will reveal who acted as their key in a flashback as a way to flesh out their relationship to their own sexuality, which makes it a more versatile tool than you might first think. Welcome to Unpacking Queer Tropes, by the way. This is going to be a series of shorter, simpler videos where I analyse and discuss writing tropes specific to LGBT topics, characters and dynamics, and obviously this is the perfect place to start. Actually, I put it up to a vote for my Patreon supporters and they chose this, but I do really think it serves as a good starting point for the series, as the trope itself is about breaking characters out of the closet and getting them out there, and this is what that video is meant to do for my series, which I hope you'll enjoy. Alright, back to the topic at hand. So there are two things that I think makes the Closet Key an interesting trope to talk about. The first being its inherent neutrality, and the second being how it's a case of truth in television. Let's start with the first one because some people might have found what I said a little confusing. What do I even mean by inherent neutrality? Well, tropes by their nature tend not to be inherently good or bad. They are, at the end of the day, writing tools. And there aren't many I would say are unequivocally bad and shouldn't be used ever, but that doesn't mean they don't still have negative and positive connotations, especially when it comes to queer writing tropes, because we as a community have a huge history of being oppressed and hated, and a lot of that comes out in how people write us or write about us. And I do plan to discuss those connotations as I cover more tropes in these videos. However, I think the Closet Key comes the closest out of any of them to purely being a tool of writing. It's prevalent in media, but that's not because it's popular, it's because it's useful and efficient. How do you establish that a character who previously showed no interest in one gender or the other is into one now? You give them a character to awaken their sexuality, which kills two birds with one stone as it informs both the character in question and the audience that there's more to it than they first thought. Though this is usually used to reveal that a character that we thought was straight was actually gay or bi, it's not always the case. As I mentioned in my recent bi rep video, Santana from Glee actually realizes that she's strictly a lesbian and confesses her love for Britney. But in very rare circumstances, it can reveal that the character isn't gay, bi or straight. Sometimes it reveals that they're none of them. This is the only example I could find, which I think is fucking criminal, but in the game My Time at Portia, you can go on a date with the character Merlin, who reveals afterward that she realized that she was aromantic thanks to it, which is really cool. More games should explore aspec characters in this context. Finally, while the trope is sometimes used to set up tragedy, it's a lot more common that the key itself is also gay or bi. Also, sometimes two characters serve as closet keys for each other, like Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, who generally just don't show attraction to women until it comes to each other. And sometimes it's used for comedy, such as Wallace Wells from Scott Pilgrim, where the running gag is that he keeps sleeping with straight guys and Scott's sister keeps losing boyfriends to him, which is honestly quite funny. The trope also sometimes overlaps with a few others, but it's usually played pretty straight, which is ironic. But what about the truth in television comment writing? What was that about? Well, that kind of leads back to my opening question, because most queer people had a closet key at some point. The thing is, nobody is born knowing they're LGBT, it's something they discover as they grow. Because we live in a heteronormative society and it's by far the most common for people to be straight and cis, it's generally assumed a person is those things until proven otherwise. And because humans have a bad habit of assuming a certain level of universality to our experiences, it's actually pretty normal for people to not realize they're queer because we kind of just assume that what we're experiencing is normal until we're made aware that it isn't. You assume every girl feels this way about other girls, or you assume all guys look at both sides with interest, or you figure that everyone's kind of blowing the whole sex and romance thing out of proportion. But then you meet someone who makes you feel a certain way at the right time, or who talks about something you weren't aware was a thing and it suddenly clicks. I actually remember my closet key. He was a guy named Caleb in my sophomore year of high school. But looking back, my first actual gay crush was on a senior named Brandon in freshman year, and I just wasn't aware of it back then because I thought what I was feeling was normal. It's incredibly fucking obvious now, but I was a dumb kid back then and I didn't realize that what I was feeling towards Brandon instead of my then girlfriend was a sign of being gay. Hell, I figured the lack of sexual interest in my girlfriend was entirely normal and that it would just develop over time. How naive I was. The realization that you're not straight is usually attached to a person, but that doesn't always mean attraction. While the realization that you're asexual tends to come from a buildup of different factors, from what I've been told by talking to my aspec friends, the realization that you're aromantic commonly comes from trying to date someone and realizing that it's just not something that works for you in the same way it does for other people. I was actually the closet key for one of my exes, as he realized he was aromantic after we dated for almost a year, and he tried really hard to feel the same way I did. We almost always recognize our queerness through our relationships to other people, because sometimes we need to see ourselves reflected to truly know ourselves. Unlike fictional characters though, a lot of us can see that reflection in media, in stories and films and games and shows. I've met people whose closet key is a fictional character, and that's often because they gave them the words for it they'd never heard and didn't realize would apply to them. This is one of the reasons that representation is so important, because it can be the mirror we need to realize our own identity. In the strictest sense, the closet key is about sexuality, but I think it should extend to gender as well. Being trans and non-binary, as I've said before, is often first about realizing what you're not. You have to realize that, despite appearances, you're not a boy or a girl. But after that, you need to find what it is you actually are, and more often than not you find that answer thanks to other trans people or trans characters. I myself only realized I was agender after a friend of mine talked with me on the subject, effectively becoming my gender closet key, and I'll always be thankful for that. We often need someone to help us find who we are, and when you're in the LGBT community, that someone tends to be your closet key. So to summarize, the closet key is a very useful trope for establishing a character's LGBT identity, and while it exists as close to true neutral as you can when you're talking about queer tropes, that belies just how useful it can truly be to a writer. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you had a good Pride Month, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!